When you look back on those two periods of development and then Kula, what was higher flow in terms of your experience hour to hour? In which context did you have a greater ability to access flow?
Well, higher flow, the easy answer for me, and very personally, was neither, right? I spent the previous decade chasing whitewater and hucking myself down mountains for years. And where I didn't know it at the time, I didn't even know the term flow. I didn't know what it meant, but I was absolutely addicted to it. And I was seeking it all the time because I found it in such deep and profound ways in other aspects of my life. In the work environment, I found that it was rare that I had those experiences, period. Whether it was in a startup, probably it was less in the tech startup because there was so much more challenge as opposed to skill. There was just so much more stress going through it. There were so many external variables beyond your control. So maybe there was a little more in the development world because so much of the development world is dialectic. It's built on discourse and human interaction and what I always say, building relationships of love and trust, right? You walk into a community in the middle of Africa as a, upper middle class guy from the US, and there's a big power dynamic there that you have to find ways to break down. And the only ways you can do that is through meaningful interaction. So there were probably more flow experiences in that particular context. But if I look at it kind of across my entire life, I would say there was very little at that time in the work environment and tons of it outside of work. It was interesting. It was actually 2 years into Kula when the stress and the anxiety had built up so much that I finally said, I'm going to get myself checked out. And I went to a psychiatrist. I said, I want to know if I have attention deficit disorder, which I had always assumed that I did and self-medicated myself and found my own little hacks to be able to deal with it. But it was in my mid-30s where I was like, I want to know for sure. And I went through the barrage of tests and they were like, yep, classic case, ADHD. What do you want? What drug do you want? Ritalin or Adderall? Was kind of their answer for it. And it wasn't until I sold the company, moved into the mountains and kind of reclaimed these other parts of my life where I had these such incredibly profound flow experiences that sent me on this trajectory of wanting to explore that a little more, particularly in the case of founders and entrepreneurship.
So can you tell us about that journey into the mountains then? And what were some of those flow experiences like?
Yeah. So when I sold the business, I was 20 kilos heavier. I feel like I had aged 20 years. I went from being quite fit and
50
athletic.
Pounds?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting at like 185 now, and I was at 230 when I sold it. And, but I mean, I can't even, back then I didn't track myself very well. I could have not imagined like what my heart rate variability was, what my cortisol levels were looking like. I mean, I was drinking more. I'd taken up cigarette smoking, something I hadn't done since I was 17 years old. All the coping mechanisms kind of came into play. So when I sold the business, I said, I need to recapture myself and my life, no more 200 days a year out of suitcases and hotels and on airplanes, cocktail meetings and having a drink to calm down and get myself to bed at night. And I'm going to flip the switch and do a 180. So I rented a little cabin on 9 acres at, 9,000 feet in the mountains, right on a whitewater river. And I planted a garden and I pulled out my kayaks and I started kayaking every day, literally 250 days a year for 3 years, like pretty much every day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. And I guess the part that was unique about it is in the early stages, I would do it alone. And that's not something that's really recommended in this sport. If you flip upside down and hit your head, get knocked unconscious and there's nobody there to help you, well, that's a really, really tragic situation that would unfold. But I knew the river well. I had been paddling it so many times, I would go out alone. And, pretty challenging whitewater. And as you and Steven talk about a lot, the risk variable in flow. I would drop into a very, very present state that I would not normally experience in everyday life. And then one day I was going out, the water was pretty high. I was feeling a little gripped, and I put on the river, paddled down to the takeout. I got to the takeout and I pulled my skirt to get out of my boat. And I had this moment where I came to, and I realized that I had no recollection of the previous 90 minutes, that I completely blanked out. And initially I got kind of scared. I was like, is something wrong with me? And, I talked to some friends about it. Nobody really knew. They were asking me like, oh, what are you doing? Smoking a bunch of weed before you go, and like asking the kind of classic, like dirtbag mountain athlete questions. And I didn't really have an answer for it. And then a couple of weeks later, it happened again. And then I started putting the pieces together that I was so present and focused in the moment that I had this transformative time experience. So I immediately started researching it. I was like, what does that? And that's how I'd heard a little bit about flow before, I knew of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, but I never really started reading and digging into it. And I said, holy crap, not only did I have it in as profound and deep of a level as I think I could possibly experience, but it had such a profound impact on my state of mind, my well-being, that I was able to start doing other tasks right afterward and be so much more focused and so much more productive that I started to see a correlation that if I could pull some of the magic from this one part of my life that some people would consider recreation, and I could leverage that into this other part of my life, which people would consider work, that there's some real magic there that we can, do incredible things with.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.